Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to a new segment that I'm calling the Community War Cry for buffs, nerfs, and reworks for the next balance patch. Now, in an ideal world, maybe I'll be able to do this every season, but this season in particular, I felt like the best thing I could do for this last week, when I have really no other content to offer, is just to collect the thoughts, feelings, and reactions, and just so many amazing suggestions from the community and all the folks who are constantly pouring their passion into the Discord, and try and put it in one place. The thread is still going to be there on the Warpforge Discord in the feedback section. There are plenty of other threads. We're going to talk about as much info as we can today without making the video a million hours long. But I really just felt like, shouting out the community, shouting out so many people that maybe aren't content creators, because not everyone has time, to do this sort of stuff. But people who are so passionate and competitive about the game and really want to see it improve. So I'm sorry if I missed you in this video. I tried to shout out everyone I could, especially from that thread that I had posted the other day. I wanted to wait maybe a little longer for more feedback, but then I was like, nah, I should just get this out, try and get the word out. And if anyone needs more and wants more of this kind of content and more suggestions, then they've got the threads to go back to. And at least we've got somewhere to start for this segment, and maybe we can do it once a month. I'll try and hold myself to it. But other than that, I think let's get to it. And just big thanks to all those who contributed and continue to contribute to make this game better and to make it, just a great card game to be a part of. So let's get into it. So really, I just wanted to take a minute to say that really, the mission of this is to provide feedback, suggestions, and a voice to the community. Ecclesiarch has done this before. BJ has done this before. Other content creators and other contributors on the Discord have done this before. And I kind of wanted to take my crack at just getting the word out, really highlighting all the great stuff that the community is doing, and hoping that it, contributes to some good for the game. So, we've got to start with the Ultramarines. I feel like I'd be remiss if we didn't open by talking about them. And there are quite a lot of suggestions and quite a lot of different approaches. I'm obviously going to share my biased approach, how I would look at balance, and as an Ultramarines player who literally played like no Ultramarines this season unless I had to, for missions or like certain segments, I just stayed away from it because it just was not fun to play mirrors. And it was operating at such a different level than every other deck that it just honestly felt not good to play. And I don't fault anyone else for playing it. It is what it is. People are competitive. People want to play the best stuff. But we really, Ultramarines got out of hand this month, and I really don't think that that's debatable. So obviously, the first thing to look at is Predator Annihilator. This thing is operating at such a high level. Even just thinking about it as a rare card in this game is kind of laughable when we look at some of these other cards we're going to talk about today. So some of the proposed changes. Increase the energy cost. Change the codex. Make the codex not a codex. Make it a rally. Change the attack static. Change the health static. I think right off the bat, what I would like to see is an increase in energy costs and a lowering of health. And then if we're going to look at the codex after those sorts of changes, I would want the codex to maybe be 2 damage instead of 4, so that it's just not nearly as impactful as it has been. Or changing the codex altogether, which I think would make more sense and would be more flavorful if it did something particularly to vehicles or troops, right? Maybe 4 damage to vehicles, or a certain amount of damage to vehicles, certain amount of damage to troops. The problem with this card is that even after you answer it, you're so far behind because it's either punch your Warlord in the face for 8 with Tack Insight, or it's destroyed like your entire board with Tack Insight, or just kind of by itself plus flankers or something like that. There's just way too much power in this codex. So I think if they really reworked the codex, maybe they don't have to touch some of the stats. But something's got to give, and I think the codex, being just a strictly better helicopter, even though it's on the ground and there are benefits to having flying, I just really think let's tamp down the stats. Let's make it come down later, right? So I don't have to see a 4 and 5 energy Predator literally every single game. That's not how the card was designed, I don't think. And if it was, then we made a mistake. So that's what I'll say about Predator. Let me know in the comments what I would say for any of these factions, what you think would be the best change. Because again, this is another opportunity on the channel just to share your thoughts and what you think would be best. Now, Battlefield Supremacy, with all of the viable vehicles and the synergy and just the fact that vehicles is just the thing to do with Ultramarines right now, I want to see Battlefield Supremacy later. I think it should be 4 energy. I don't have any qualms with that. I just think that this deck is functioning way too efficiently and dropping threats way too early for what it's supposed to be doing. Now, would it be rare to see a repulsor a couple turns ahead of schedule? Is that acceptable? Probably. But with cards like Outrider, which we'll talk about, and the access to the other flankers and the access to Inspired Retribution, and just the combination of threats and answers in this deck is truly just unmatched by any other faction right now. And so Battlefield Supremacy, everything slowing down allows for aggressive strategies to come in and have counterplay to what they're doing, right? I've said that I think Galen is competitive into this deck, but it has to draw perfectly. Same thing with Swarmlord. And to a different extent, I think that the town reinforcements have a way to play into the deck, but they can't really out-aggress it. They actually kind of have to go over the top, which is just always a huge risk when you have a deck that has so many threats that go into the late game. So I just think if everything is going to seen 1 to 2 turns later, this deck isn't just operating at an extremely high power level. The power curve, I think, becomes a little bit flatter. It can have bad draws. It can have some inconsistency to it, allowing for fine-tuned aggressive strategies to really attack it. Speaking of, Outrider with Tactical Insight is just punching extremely hard and just is such an efficient answer that's also being discounted by Battlefield Supremacy. Right now, if this was always 3 energy or always 4 energy or 6 energy for like a certain flanker, but the fact that it gets discounted, right, by Supremacy, and obviously you can use your Hive Factory too at certain points, and then it's going to punch whatever threat is threatening your Predator that's probably already hit them, to take that off the board. Outrider is just, it's a glue card that's operating at too high a power level. Again, I'm saying power a lot, and that's really just to highlight that when we look at some of these other cards, when we look at some of the reworks and the potential buffs, this deck is just wildly a head and shoulder above everything else. And so we let it get that way. It shouldn't be that way. It needs to be toned down. It shouldn't be destroyed. I would never advocate for just nerfing something literally out of existence. I just don't think that that's what we're trying to do here. I'd much rather talk about buffs as well. But first and foremost, we got to talk about nerfs for making this deck just a little less powerful, or at least a good bit less powerful, so that other things can actually counterplay it. So that's all I'll say here. I think there's tons of other Ultramarine suggestions. There's a lot of suggestions to the -2 energy card, to Tactical Insight, things like that. I think my preference before we get there is toning down these Codex triggers and looking at stats and looking at also like when are these cards hitting the board, and really say, all right, let's make these cost a little more, let's make these a little less efficient, and then let's kind of check in on what that is. Predator, even if you're nerfing the stats but keeping the Codex, is going to be too powerful. I really am advocating for the Codex be reworked, because I just think that this card is way too strong in conjunction with everything else. So that's what I got to say about Ultramarines. One thing I kind of want to note is, like, how can infantry and aggro come back for Ultramarines, right? It is just strictly worse than what's happening for the vehicle decks. But if the vehicle decks really receive the nerfs that I would hope for, then I think infantry maybe comes back into the fold a little bit, right? There brings a little bit more variety. We're not seeing Predator in every single deck, maybe, or we're not seeing Battlefield Supremacy in every single deck. Maybe we're actually seeing a Chaplain. We're actually seeing, a Firstborn and some of these more aggressive cards. And of course, I am a Uriel fan, but I don't want this now to be the faction of vehicles, and that's it, right? That's swinging the pendulum to a different direction, right? So that's kind of what I got to say. I'm not going to talk about buffs for Ultramarines in this video, but I would like for infantry or aggressive strategies to be more of an option and not to lean on just dropping haymakers with tanks on tanks on tanks every single game. So that's what I got to say about Ultramarines, and thank you everyone who contributed in the different posts as well. Where have all the elves gone? This is something I keep asking myself, and I'm sure, not pictured here are Jamo, Simurg and Barrack, just, praying and worshiping Kane to try and bring him back to life. And credit to the artist here. It was cut off in my little snapshot here, so I wanted to put that up there. If we're not going to get a reinforcement for the Eldar, and I put them purposefully as second because I really want to talk about them for a little bit today, then I would love to see a rework that felt similar to what Ultramarines received a couple patches ago. This faction has been untouched for so long. I don't want to fix something that's not broken, but there are things within this faction that are broken, in my opinion. And I think, just to bring some life back. I mean, we have whole threads from Jamo, Simurg, and Barrack talking about every single card and how you can make it better. There's such a passionate community for the Eldar, and they can have some amazing matchups. They can really reward, some top skill in the game. I personally have a lot of love for them myself, for the tempo aggro style. But there's just a lot that has just been left untouched, and I really think that's a problem. So we're going to highlight some cards here, but I am going to go to the Discord thread and read off some other suggestions too. So some of the ones that stood out to me and that I really liked was one, Inspiring Legacy. Not surprised if you haven't seen this card. It's Forge level 40. The suggestion was to bring it down to Forge level 30 and change, instead of Shuriken 1 to a friendly unit, make a Storm Guardian. I think that would be a nice little kind of play pattern to add to Anvir or Eliek for whatever reason. Actually I can gain access to a stone, or I can capitalize on a unit with Shuriken. But giving Shuriken 1 to a friendly unit this turn is obviously incredibly underwhelming. That's just not a card. But making, a Storm Guardian is a card and gives you a little bit of an advantage. Speaking of things that are not cards or have needed some help for a long time, Mr. Keltok has not seen the light of day since, well, I guess Jamo is playing it and honestly playing it very, very well. But I think Path of the Seer needs an update. I think making this 1 energy is totally fine. Yes, you get to get a guaranteed Spirit Stone that your opponent can't stop you doing, but there just aren't that many payoffs for going late as Eldar. Yes, there's a legendary card that makes all those different units, but the way that the game's progressed with Blast, with AoE damage, with, still Will of Gork and things like that, there's just no reason to play Keltok and play Eldar going late. Path of the Seer being as 1 maybe allows you to get more in this mid-range control area where, yes, it's fetching these particular things that you're looking for and fixing your curve even at a much more efficient rate than 2 energy. It's just a really large cost for what you're getting, because it is a random card that you're drawing, right, and putting a card into your deck. And then I kind of want to highlight, in the spirit of vehicles, which we just talked about, look at Fire Prism. 7 energy rare, flying, rally, deal 3 damage to an enemy. Do we think that this card is remotely in the realm of Predator Annihilator? Absolutely not, right? So some of the changes that I thought were really creative, right, is maybe give it a rally 4, similar to some of the suggestions for getting rid of the Codex off Predator, but then also having a buff for what it does particularly to a vehicle, because we know that this guy's upset about, Fire Prism being, if you heard the honking. I think that Fire Prism also has an opportunity for this Armor Shred. We haven't seen Armor Shred in the game. Many people have talked about it. That would really be a nice little, different dynamic to be looking at. So really quickly, I'm going to hop over to the Eldar thread that has just been full of different feedback. So let me get to that real quick. Okay, so just to rattle off a couple other changes, and thanks for Cymerg for adding things here, right? Like cards like Fire and Fade. So there's suggestion here would be should apply a discount to the cost of the unit. We've got Deadly Ambush, allow it to stun an enemy unit instead of an enemy troop. What else have we got? Warp Spider, Strike, Enter Stealth. That could be really interesting. I do think that the card's still like pretty good, but that could be an interesting way of pushing it a little bit. Let's see, what else? I think there's been a lot of suggestions for the Wraith Blades and Wraith Knight and things like that. Offering flank, offering different Spirit Stone triggers, things like that. Also for the control players, like Infinity Circuit, should it cost 4 instead of 5? There's a lot of potential. Obviously, I can't read through everything. I'm just going to check if there's anything else we want to talk about. Avatar of Cain, I think many people have made suggestions, right? Whether it has something up front that it does, right? Killing a unit, dealing damage to every troop on the board. I do think that 9-drops are mostly horrific in this game, and I actually would love to model 9-drops off of Triumph of St. Catherine. I feel like that is where the design team like really got something right, in that it's a strong unit that basically has to be answered, and they did tweak the faith ability, which I appreciate. That was a good change to make it have a little bit more punch. But it also has an immediate and a lasting effect when you play it, right? Because you can pray and get armor on that unit. So I would love to see 9 energy cards that have a direct impact, a direct value, and then basically demand an answer, which makes sense because you're paying 9 energy for it. So there's plenty of information on other Eldar changes in the feedback and the other threads. So, Jamo posts a lot, Cymerg and Barrick have also contributed quite a lot. So, and many other players. So definitely check those out if you're itching for other Eldar changes. And to EG, from me to EG, I would just say, please throw Eldar a bone. I don't know what that bone is, but whether it's buffs or reworks or a reinforcement drop that we haven't been told about, I just would like to see that for the Eldar. Okay. Praying for the Sisters of Battle, not pictured here, Aplane and Stradivarius coming up with infinite suggestions directly from Devotion to the Emperor. It's no secret that Sisters of Battle have struggled since their release, even though they are an incredible faction and have a huge fan base as well, and very passionate community, I should say. They really have struggled. I would put them at tier 0.5, tier 2.5 rather. I think that Junith is becoming more competitive. I think Erica is becoming more competitive. Funnily enough, Morven, who doesn't really need to function off faith, has gotten worse and worse as the faith changes have come through. So I think we might want to look at penitence. And there's so much that I think Avalane would want me to talk about here. Obviously, we can't get into all of it, but I asked them in particular, what are some of the things that you would really want to highlight? So we're going to talk about that. So, not specifically talking about Divine Intervention in the card, but if we look at this 8 faith requirement, Pray and Faith rework and buffs for this faction, I think I would advocate for us to think about, from a design standpoint. Faith is very hard to accumulate. It does require Relics of St. Catherine, plus other things. And there are just certain games where, I played enough Sisters of Battle to know that there are many games where you're just completely shut out in a matchup from gaining any faith at all. And you're basically faith starved, and then your cards read, play a bad card that doesn't have a faith ability anymore, right? So there are many ways to address this. I think one of the first ways that Avalane advocated for, I think Stradivarius as well, and I really I would co-sign here, is when a card can't trigger its faith ability, it should give you some sort of faith payoff, right? So when Retributor, you've been denied 2 faith the entire game, maybe you even went second, right? And like you used your defense faith stratagem, you're stuck on 1 faith, and your 2 Retributors are sitting in your hand laughing at you, right? Then when I play my first faith Retributor, I would like for it to give me 1 faith, right? I just feel like there needs to be some sort of fail-safe, like some sort of kind of raising the floor of Sisters of Battle, especially for Faith and Prey, to make it so that you're not just hardcore punished if you're never able to establish Faith properly. I just feel like you're either grinding it out and overcoming the opponent, or you're getting your face smashed in. Like, there's really no in between from my experience with Sisters of Battle. So I think that, there are many, many suggestions in the SOB feedback thread on Discord. Feel free to look through that, whether you're EG or whether you're a player. But there's tons of different suggestions, and I think I really want to highlight that Faith in particular needs a closer look. Speaking of a closer look, Death Cult Assassin is a laughably bad unit. And in particular, this faction has some solid 4 drops, solid 6 drops, some great late game, right? But the 3 drop slot in particular in Death Cult Assassin is kind of the poster child for this, are absolutely unplayable, right? And so I felt this about the release of Sisters of Battle. I felt like some of the epics were like, what is the thought process here? These things seem extremely weak, and they did. They turned out to be weak, and they played weak. So I would really like to see things like Death Cult Assassin be updated in some sort of way. I mean, this is just not a card that you can really play in modern Warpforge now. We're a year since the closed alpha. We've gone a long way, and I've been there for pretty much all of it. And I would like for us to have factions that get added to the game that aren't just the best because they're new, but also not the worst because they're new either. So we really need to find some sort of middle ground there. And then my last kind of point here, before we look at a couple other changes that have been, thrown out there by the community, is Guidance of Saints, right? If we compare this to Digestion Pool for the Tyranids, right, pretty much everyone would say Tyranids functions at the highest level with the ability to select Digestion Pool. Why would we also not give that as a more accessible option for Sisters of Battle? It's even worse because it's only infantry, right? It's not troop. Why do we have to go to Forge 40 to get Guidance of the Saints, right? Now, if you want to devote your time and energy and grind and be a completionist and whatever else, and you've got the money and you've got the time, go for Forge 40, go for Forge 50. But if I want people to have less barrier to entry to this game, competitively or otherwise, then I need for cards like Guidance of the Saints to be on Forge 20, on Forge 10. I guess I'd even take a Forge 30. But, I remember reading very vividly, someone was like, it took me 90 packs to get to Forge 40 and like a bunch of crystals, right? So the cost to get a card that probably is going to make your deck have a 5 to 10% higher win rate at Forge 40 is a very steep cost. And this is kind of my first PSA about defense and offense cards. They are so unique to this game. I think they can offer a lot, but I think whether it's design, whether it's the adding more content, I think these are being pushed out without really considering what they do to these factions. We'll talk about the other faction that was added to this game and how there's an offense card that warps that entire faction's ability to function. So again, I don't think offense and defense cards should be hard counters or hard buffs to a particular faction, but maybe they give you a 5% edge in one matchup versus another, not like 10 to 20 versus 0, right? I just don't think that that's healthy for the game. So just to go over a couple other SOB changes, right? And I'm going to go back to kind of what Avalanche had originally said, right? The 2 drops feel pretty good. Would love if Battle Sisters heals 1 was just +1 health, but then Junith might be too strong. I think that's wise. 3 drops for sure need some help. Celestian is just too easily killed by melee flankers. That's for sure. And then let's see what else. 4 drops are mostly good. 5 drops, Canoness feels almost good. Feel like 4-4-6 rather than 5-4-5 would make it better, and make use of the armor, right? That's kind of like, honestly, if even early on into design, if we just want to take a card that we know that's functional, like Carnifex, right, for the Tyranids, and then we basically just transport that design idea onto Canoness, but plus a little bit more flavor, and flexibility, that's fine because we know that that works, right? We know that that's good. Um, yeah, so there's plenty of comments by many other folks here, plenty of other suggestions, and I think that I'd love to spend more time on really all of the very passionate communities here, but just wanted to highlight some other ideas. And I think many people have a really good bird's eye view of what is functional in a faction and what isn't. And I just think that that's free stuff for the design teams to use or the balancing teams to use. So Sisters of Battle definitely needs a little bit more of a careful eye than some of the other factions, but I think we're getting closer to what it could be, and that I have some hope for. Okay, we got to talk about Chaos, which also is the most, like, I think pretty sure the most popular, most played faction in the game. So I also consider Chaos in a very different way, where I'm like, man, if I want more players to play this game and I want this game to be more successful, then geez, if we could get Chaos to be even more attractive to people, that would be good for the game. So this I'm kind of dubbing the faction of one play style. And not pictured here is Buggy and Ecclesiarch having 2,000, probably even more at this point, victories with just Abaddon. And that's the problem, right? Abaddon actually wasn't that good way back when, but then he got the modal ability to heal himself, and also being a 40 health warlord, that's pretty powerful. Or giving a Dark Pact, really has just made him the premier warlord. Sylar, I've seen aggressive strategies. Sure, you can probably get to 3k with it, maybe higher than that, but I don't think we can really say that that's a competitive playstyle. Honestly, I will say Harkin sometimes takes me by surprise with certain go-wide strategies. He can be very good. And then we've got Galaron, who just basically on release was dead on release. I previewed a lot of cards. We're actually going to talk about one of those cards today. And, I was super hyped for them, but then I realized very quickly that there was just no room for them. Buggy has been obviously a huge and vocal member of the community for Chaos, and has innovated and is an excellent top player. Same with Ecclesiarch too. And I just think there are so many changes where they're just kind of left untouched. And I really think that Chaos could also use a little bit of a facelift, a little bit, more diversity in their deck building and gameplay. And I'd really be surprised if other people don't feel that way. Sure, you can hate Chaos sometimes at high rolls, sometimes there's nothing you can do into them. But think about it. You're only playing against basically one warlord for the most part. I would not want my faction to have literally one option. I think that's just not, and I don't think that's what EG wants. This is kind of my aside here, is that EG has said in balance patch after balance patch, we try to find warlords that are underplayed. We try to find cards that are underplayed, strategies that are underplayed, and then boost them. And I think the last few balance patches have sort of addressed some of that, but maybe haven't gone as deep as just myself as a player would like. So, Buggy actually sent over literally basically the whole faction and changes, and thank you for doing that, because they also already have their graphics, which is incredible. And so let's start with some old classics here. We've got Venom Crawler loses in armor, and the Chaos Terminator absorbs that armor. I still advocate for this change. I still think that this is a good change. Venom Crawler would feel less bad being able to clear it when it's still giving you so much upfront value. Chaos Terminator becomes a real 6-drop option, and is something that, especially the more go late, the more Black Crusade control versions of Chaos, could actually thrive. Speaking of which, Accursed Hellbrute, when I previewed it, I knew it wasn't going to be good, and I wanted to showcase it and be energetic and all that by preview video, but frankly I knew that this was not going to see the light of day. But I like this change suggested by Buggy, and potentially getting feedback from other people. I'm not so sure, so I don't want to count them out. But I like this, right? Give a Dark Pact to a troop, and then it still retains this. When a friendly troop receives a Dark Pact, this troop gains it as well, right? So you can set this up where, on 6 or 7, you play a troop, it lives, you give that the Vanguard one, the Pact of Blood, and then your Cursed Hellbrute with 9 health and huge attack stats also gets that. That is a real threat. That is a real obnoxious card to deal with, and definitely something that would benefit from Black Crusade. And then I definitely want to take a moment to say RIP to anyone who enjoyed the idea of playing sorcerers or spells or like these special powers in Chaos, because they just have not been viable basically ever. And so Sorcerer really could use some love. There's the other 5-drop Epic that could use some love. I know Talent was like kind of, to me, a placeholder mechanic where it was like, great, if it lives, you get a card and then it does something. I get it, right? So you either need to buff these units so that they live till the next turn, or let's just rework it, right? Let's put rallies in there for upfront value. Honestly, maybe we get a little creative here and we develop, some sort of, invocation, mechanic similar to the Tau, right? Where like it's a special spell that like is tacked on to your card for free or something like that. There's a lot of design space here, and it doesn't have to be terribly complicated. But honestly, as someone who got into Warhammer 40k through Dawn of War and saw like how powerful these chaos sorcerers and like, wizards were, like I would love to see that be a playstyle. I would love for Sylar, to maybe be playable, for Galaron control, to make everyone vulnerable and pick them off and get card advantage, and then, play some of these big, dumb, scary chaos things. I just think there's so much potential, and I get that, EG maybe can't make reworks every single patch or really address a lot of these things every single patch, but I just want to, get that out there for the folks who have really shared it. And there are plenty of other suggestions, Buggy, linked in the thread where I've been collecting all this information. So feel free to check that out for other suggestions as well. I just think it would be great for Chaos, who honestly at times is more of a poster child for this game than the Ultramarines. It would be great if they were also good, or also had diverse gameplay. So that's kind of my spiel for them. All right. What can wake the Necrons from their slumber? There are still some diehard Necron fans, but obviously no one is playing them, into the Ultramarine menace. So what's really going to wake them up? I think there's a number of things. Necrons have at times been extremely powerful, extremely consistent. Basically, if they go late, they're going to win the game. They've kind of been the de facto control, faction besides the Orks. But I think a lot of their cards, and a lot of the cards that basically have never seen the light of day, they're just way too inefficient. And as much as I would love to see like an aggro Necron, sort of like Nemezer, go wide strategy, and there have been some nice reworks, I would say, in the past, I think we're still really missing the boat with a lot of these things. And I wanted to shout out specifically, I think it was Cryoflash and why can't I see their name? Oh, that's so annoying. I think it's Varus. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my Discord right now. Who contributed some great feedback about the Necrons. I think a lot of it is about making these spells more efficient, right? Disruption Blades down to 1 would mean that, yes, we have to deal with maybe the Scarab Menace, which I don't love, but I don't know, with things like Haildrake Strike, or not Haildrake Strike, rather, with Hail Strike, the 1 damage to everything. There have been way more factions gaining AoE board clears and like flankers and things like that, where Disruption Blades, I don't know, I think about Nemezer, right? Like just spawning a bunch of troops, with Resurrection Orb, and then you're like, great, let's slap some blades on them and go to town, and then maybe play another spell on top of that. I think that's a nice suggestion. Solar Pulse, bringing it down to 3, makes this more of a tech card that you would probably see more of in Necrons. I think there have been plenty of other suggestions for this card too. But just making some of these spells that don't directly add to the board, right? And this is a principle that I take very much from Magic the Gathering, right? Cards that do not affect the board need to have some other tangible value. And there are a lot of cards that just don't do that. Same thing with Implacable Conqueror, right? This is not affecting the board, so we need to make this cheaper, or we need to give this, a better effect, right? Same thing with Undying Legions. And although I'm not a huge fan of this, like, for the rest of the game clause, because I just think that kind of warps a lot of different metas, giving +1 ranged would definitely be more impactful to all of your troops instead of shield to a remnant, which is just really not a real thing, not a real thing that players would want or care about, and potentially reducing the cost, right? So what this would allow for the Necrons to do is to diversify their stratagem and spell package to really benefit their playstyle, right? But also benefit being able to pivot within a meta, right? So I just think that, and also the Necrons will get their reinforcement. We know that that's on the way after the faction release of the Gene Stealers, most likely. But we're still a ways out, and they've suffered a lot of kind of random nerfs or like buffs that or sort of ended up playing like nerfs. So I think they could really use some love, and I appreciated these suggestions. As someone, I will say, full disclosure, never plays Necrons. So this is really coming straight from the community and just kind of my thought process playing against them. What would be better for them? What would have been really good used against me? Now we get to the Orks, right? It's funny that the Orks have become, or have always been, I guess, the faction of answers, but they want to smash, right? They want to play big dumb vehicles. They want to play aggro. They want to do all this, and frankly, I just don't think you can do that. Also, one of their premier, potentially best aggro options in Gordrang was pretty much taken out of the game. So here, I put here, not pictured as, Stradivarius, Cryo, Ecclesiarch, and me wondering why Gordrang wasn't just deleted from the game. Oh, wait, he kind of was. It just goes to show that, again, really, if the focus from the design and balance, or really the balance patches, has been this kind of mission statement, right, of we want to uplift warlords that are not performing well, we want to uplift cards that are not performing well, then we really have to take a look at the card pool of Orks that, yes, at times has some of the best and most flexible options, but not necessarily to play at the same power level with other play styles, right? So it'd be much more interesting if cards like Mega Blast Deathcopter, right, had other text to them, right? Whether you give it flank, whether you give it some upfront, rally ability, right? People were like, oh, maybe, in the reinforcement drop, they were like, wow, this is like a mini Hemlock. It's not a mini Hemlock. It's just not in a card that most would play. And even Kill a Can, which is kind of a signature card for this faction, is unplayable at 5 energy with 5 health and huge attack stats and unstable. This needs to be a good unit on 5, so increasing the health, giving it 1 armor, I think is totally within the realm of possibility. And then, getting to get 2 of these bad boys when it's late game, great, that makes sense. But I never want to play this thing on 5. Same thing with Deathcopter. And if we look at the Ultramarines vehicle package, right, and what they're doing, it's just like, whoa, we got to update some stuff, right? So I think that the vehicles should be a viable strategy with Orks, whether you want to play like something with Gordrang or with Zagstruck, or I don't know, in even Gaskell, and you want to go like, vehicle wide, buff my stuff. I think that those should be options within the Orks, and I just think that wherever we can sneak these changes in, I think that again, that would give a little bit of flavor, a little bit of life into some of these factions that frankly, understandably get forgot about when they're still putting up decent numbers, even if it's just one warlord. And then let's talk about the change to Gordrang and the change to Huge Choppa. You're not going to play this warlord now. So we need to revert this change, whether we give it concussive, whether we only give it +3, whether we only just put +2 in concussive. It's just like Zagstruck and Gordrang already had a similar flavor to them. So you either need to kind of like rework one of them so that they're filling a different niche, or at least from my opinion, because I think many people enjoyed playing Gordrang, and at times it was a really great meta call. And I just think that people should be rewarded for thinking about the game analytically. Yes, I'm biased that way. Then let's just revert this back. I didn't think that this was a problem. I did not think it was oppressive. I guess maybe you can say that that's one sample size, but I didn't really feel that this needed to be changed when it was. And so I personally, and as a player and as a content creator, would advocate that we should get Gordrang back on the roster and maybe find a way to get like aggro Orks to work. We don't really see that because it's just not going to be as good. So I just think that that's also a really great opportunity to make a few changes. So Got to keep with the coffee for everything we're covering. All right. So thankfully, Algorithm came in with a save here. I didn't have anything queued up for Tyranids until they shared some stuff right before I started recording the video. So we've actually got quite a few awesome suggestions in here, and I'm sure other people have contributed as well. So here I just have actually pictured here would be Algorithm without their morning coffee, because I think they were talking to me while they were on their way to work or at work. So Tyranids, where are they in the tier list in my mind? I think they're tier 2. I actually think that Turvagon and Swarmlord are viable in the meta, but like again, this is like the meta is just Ultramarines, but if we think about decks that can still compete and get a pretty decent win rate, overall, I think Swarmlord is probably the highest, and then Turvagon probably behind that. I've even done pretty well with Terra Vardengast. I think the only Warlord that has not seen the light of day is Neurothrope. Now, BJ put out a video. I've tried that build. I actually think it does have some strengths to it. Maybe it is more competitive than I give it credit for. But something I do want to highlight in this video today is the idea of, can we play control Tyranids? I think the answer is not really. And so what would maybe be some changes? And then as an aside, and I would say more importantly, Algorithm have some great thoughts just about this inherent tension between needing to have troops on the board and also needing stratagems to push those troops, across the victory line. And so, we're going to talk a little bit about how troops and stratagems are kind of in, contention, they're in conflict with one another, and what is maybe an idea to sort of address that. So let's talk about what's on the screen, and then we'll talk about some other suggestions from here. In my opinion, starting with Tyrant Guard, I just think that this card over time has gotten worse and worse. I've actually cut it from quite a few Tyranid decks, or cut it down to 1, because there are just so many good ranged options, or there's just better removal, or whatever it is, better flankers that can take advantage of the 0 ranged attack. I still wouldn't want to see this be on 4. Because it is quite a strong turn 1 play if Tyranids are going second and you've got Digestion Pool. I think on 3 energy, it's still just not that threatening. I guess maybe just in this meta, this might be a little bit of bias, but I think adding a health to this card would actually go quite a long way to making it feel like a real roadblock. I just don't feel like it's a real roadblock anymore when I play Tyranids. Obviously, if I get high roll, starts where I got hardened biology and other things like that, sure. But in terms of the floor of this card, I think the floor is rather low. And I think even just giving this +1 health might move the needle a little bit, which would also help the slower, more control-oriented Tyranid decks, right? If someone prefers that playstyle. Speaking of, Toxic Entanglement is the only real removal that is not a stratagem plus a troop or a troop itself. And I think it's just too inefficient, and I think you get punished at 4 energy when you might want to play a 6-drop with Digestion Pool or another 4-drop. So I would advocate that we take Toxic Entanglement down to 3 energy. I think that would make it a more attractive option for different Tyranid decks. I think it would definitely make a more attractive option for control Tyranid decks. And I just think that might be a nice card to target. Similar with Norn Emissary, you're not really going to see this thing. To me, I feel like this should get closer to operating like Avenging Zeal. Now, not the season where Avenging Zeal was like every single time on 6 energy, 7 energy. But if you reduce this down to maybe 12 or 10 and leave the lower cost by 2, or you make the lower cost by like 3 and leave it at like 13 or 14 or something like that, then I think this card actually sees the light of day and maybe is a real incentive to play Neurothrope. And it's also a cool design. A couple other design spaces we could think about is having optional costs for things like this. So maybe being able to play a mini Norn Emissary on 7, right, instead of 14, so that when you draw this card later in the game and there's no way you're going to cast it, it's got a modal condition where I can get a mini Norn Emissary that isn't just a dead card in my hand. Speaking of dead cards in hand, you could also, adapt a little bit of a magic thing where you have an alternative casting cost ability or a reveal ability where you reveal a card from your hand. It has some sort of effect on the board or an effect on a troop, right? Maybe Norn Emissaries effect is, give a troop blast 3, right? When you reveal it from your hand and you pay a certain cost. We don't have to get so complicated with it. I don't want this game to be overcomplicated, to be honest. But there's a lot of design space that I think EG could get into. And speaking of that, I want to highlight Algorithm's idea of adaptation, right? And I wanted to get this right, and hopefully I won't get it wrong. We'll see. Is this idea of adding a keyword adaptation similar to Invocation to cards like Ambush Predator, Encircle the Prey, Predator, Instincts, Bounding Leap, right? All these different buff stratagems, and basically making it that whether it's like troops that are able to select these adaptations or that adaptations are accessed by a particular warlord or something, that might be a bigger system change, right? Maybe that's more of like a massive rework for Tyranids, but it kind of solves this issue and this tension of I need to have troops on the board first and then stratagems. And if I get this in any weird order, it's not going to be great. And it really means that we're always going to be looking at, the power of Tyranids is their troops, and that's it. And so, I think if we want to kind of not homogenize things, but just kind of make their ability to function a little bit more consistently, I think this idea of adaptation is really unique. I also want to shout out some other suggestions here, and I know there are other folks who tried to get in on this that I maybe wasn't able to put their input in. So thank you as well. Ravenous Hunter increasing the cost to 5 energy, right, might allow for a significant nerf, which would open design space for other cards. I think that's a great idea. Mawlock, which I think sees a little bit of play. Give it some sort of backlash draw cards, so you're not just kind of losing out on that tempo. Hive Guard, Vanguard adjacent units get +2 health. I think that's kind of nice. Maybe change the rally to gain HP. Some sort of adjacent buff. That I think adjacent buffs would be a cool direction for Tyranids to get, because it kind of makes sense, right? They're sort of like adapting and growing together. There's some things like Winged Tyrant, right? Some of these higher cost things, Tarnifex, right? Tyranifex rather. But things like Rally, put in a Gargoyle into play, or 2 Gargoyles, right? Again, giving some upfront value to some of these really, really high cost cards. And unfortunately, at the time of our recording, we're not going to get all the feedback from Algorithm about, how to rework or look at this like monster card type. But I'm hoping that the design team will, get into that at some point, because I think that's another great opportunity for the Tyranids. All right, last, I think, but not least, is the Tau. And I had this feeling of like, should I even suggest anything? Because they just got a reinforcement drop. But I am going to suggest something, because I played a lot of Tau this season. I'm going to play a lot till the end of the season, most likely. And I just think infantry aggro is too weak. I think Warshaper is too weak. I think we need a change with that. And I think the intention of the reinforcement was to bring about more infantry, or like infantry as a viable strategy. So not pictured here is me having a 40% win rate on Warshaper, and then definitely even worse on stream. So I really would like to see that be a change. And then I'm also going to get on my soapbox about a particular offense card. So bear with me here. So first things first, and I didn't get any feedback about Tau, which is fine in the channel. I don't think there's a ton to really say, other than maybe focusing on some of the new cards that have come out and what that's like. So Grizzly Feast, take it down to 1 energy. I'm also open to the idea of, if you don't want to buff Warshaper's health, which I think from their design standpoint, they were like, here's our first 30 health Warlord. If you want to keep it that way, then I think you got to knock it down to 1 energy, and you got to give him +2 health to him, but maybe +1 health to infantry troops. Going wide in this game is easily punishable. So you really have to make it attractive to do that. And I think when we're designing a lot of these kind of board clear cards, which can feel really great, we're not always thinking about the other side of the coin, which is like, how do we get units, or how do we develop playstyles that aren't just punished by, the staple strategies that we've already produced. So I think the idea of giving +1 melee, and then +2 health to your Warlord, and then a +1 health to your troops, I think that actually would be a nice little bump for Warshaper to be a bit more of an attractive option, and open up this idea of more of like this infantry curve out, go wide strategy. I'm going to skip this for a second. Crew Carnivore, this is just kind of an easy buff. I think you just buff this to 2. This card I run as a 1 of. I'd like to run it as a 2 of. I like the little design space that they're kind of using with this rally, don't lose out on card advantage kind of thing. It is a nice little infantry troop that can get buffed up. I think combination between a Grizzly Feast buff and a Crew Carnivore buff, even just that, I think would make this archetype much more real. So if you want to go light, which I think is fitter, because the Tau just got a lot of new stuff, and a lot of people feel that some of it's OP. I don't think so. I mean, maybe after Ultramarines get nerfed, maybe. But I think it's actually the only deck that I like to play into Ultramarines, period, which is really crazy right now. I will say I'll shout out Lone Spear. Frank Knight and I have talked about this. Lone Spear having 668 as its stat line is a little underpowered into certain threats. So if I want to remove a Venom Crawler, I can't. If I want to remove a Predator, I can't. So I think maybe 778 actually is in order for Lone Spear, but I'm willing to wait on that because that card still can be extremely impactful, even without a stat change. So I'm willing to be wrong about that. And then I just want to highlight Solar Eclipse for the design team. I don't want to see offense and defense cards for Gene Stealers or for Astra Militarum this year that completely negate the faction or make it irrelevant, right? We had a Raging Storm for Sisters of Battle. We did a nice change with that. We've had to live with Solar Eclipse literally since Tower added this year, and it basically makes Shadow Sun unplayable, in my opinion, right? I even did some experimenting where I was like, you know what, Shadow Sun, it's got extra health. What if I just run the same Enva package in Shadow Sun where I've got extra health and maybe I get a Marker Light here or there, maybe I get a Coordinated Engagement here or there. And every single game I played, my opponent took Solar Eclipse on offense. So it's 50% of the time, but it's every single game I'm going, I'm on defense. And it basically just shuts off half my Warlord, right? Where I can't Marker Light things. And it just shuts off the synergy between Coordinated Engagement and Shadow Sun's ability. So I literally was like, I can't play this Warlord at a top tier level. I have to play Enva. Even playing Enva, I could get away with Coordinated Engagement and Marker Light because most of the time my opponent's not even going to take it because they're like, well, he can't reliably Marker Light every turn, which is true. But it's like, even just playing the same build in Shadow Sun, I'm never going to get even a little bump from Shadow Sun because they're always going to choose Solar Eclipse. So I really need this card to be adjusted. I'm trying to think of what would be a better actual change than me just telling you to change it. I just think that this ability is too strong. So maybe it gets, I don't know. I think even camo, because camo for that full turn cycle is just such a problem. I don't know, or maybe there's a clause that says like, but Marker Light still applies or something, I don't know. But I think maybe this just needs to be thrown out, reworked, changed, whatever it is, because it literally is making Shadow Sun not a competitive Warlord, and I just think that that's a huge problem. So that's kind of me on my soapbox for that. That's what I got for you today, folks. Thanks for sticking with me. I'm sure I missed things that people would advocate for, so hit me up in the comments. Send it out into the ether, and hopefully the machine gods will carry it somewhere. But I just want to say thank you to the community. This kind of was a video that I got really energized about, and really just felt like it was kind of the only thing I could put out at the moment that felt like I was adding anything to the community itself. So shout out to all of you guys. You're passionate. You've got great ideas. I hope that people are reading them. If you haven't, I really advocate that you do. And other than that, I hope to catch you next time, either on stream or in a balance patch, that restores a bit of hope to the galaxy, as it were. So until then, I will catch you in the next one.